Our guide today is Greg Thompson, a facilitator, coach, and speaker with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. As president of Blue Point Leadership Development, Greg leads a talented group of professionals who design and deliver challenging educational experiences that accelerate the natural development of leaders. Greg is a co-author of 3 books, The Power to Lead, The Leadership Experience, and Unleashed, The Leader as Coach. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Julian. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar today. I'm thrilled to be your guide and host in our conversation around master of your own ship. This idea of self-mastery, I believe, runs at the heart of all leadership development. As a leadership coach, I continually see this area of self-mastery as one of the most fertile areas for leaders to develop in. In fact, I'm convinced that the pathway to great leadership always runs to some extent through this idea of self-mastery. So I'm thrilled to be your guide as we take about a 30 to 40-minute discussion on this important point today. Probably everybody on the call at some time or another went to a high school reunion. Now, if you think back on that high school reunion, most of them are extraordinarily traumatic, emotionally charged situations. Most of us attend them with great levels of both excitement and trepidation. Most of us have unfinished business, have both good and bad experiences that pop up in our minds. We have all ideas about judgment, both judging others and being judged. We have regrets, and we have experiences we want to relive. The whole idea of a high school reunion at its core is just an emotional hotbed. It also is a very fascinating study of emotional maturity and development. When you think about it, think about how people have changed over the course of the time when they've been away from school. In my particular case, I can remember my high school reunion. There was 2 people stood out. First of all, there was a young woman at school. She was quite frankly, a bit on the weird side, quiet, and really was very unknown to most of the rest of us in the class. And so, at the time, quite frankly, we considered her to be a loner and relatively weird. Now, at the high school reunion, this poised, articulate, confident, well-spoken young woman was really the belle of the ball. Interesting. Another person stood out for me, and at the time he was a popular athlete, popular jock, and he was still, quite frankly, at the reunion, still a big, lovable kid. Really interesting. We both, looking at both these individuals, both of them held a great deal of appeal to me. I really enjoyed the conversations with the popular jock. I still love to have a beer with him and love to talk about old times, but interesting. I wanted to go work for the weird gal. I wanted to go work with her. I wanted to be part of whatever she was part of because of the way she spoke and because of the way she talked about her life's journey and her work at the time. So what was the difference between the 2 of them? I believe it's all around this idea of becoming the master of your own ship and the corresponding emotional maturity that comes with that. Before we start the conversation today, I'd like just to look at this idea of becoming an emotionally powerful leader. And so we can define it in a variety of terms. At Blue Point, we like to look at leadership in terms of its outcome, in terms of the evidence around leadership. So how do you know if you work for an emotionally powerful leader? Here are some things you might want to consider. Do you engage in difficult, usually avoided conversations? This is the number 1 clue. If all your conversations are very superficial, very predictable, if there's a sense of fragility about every conversation, if you find yourself or your boss avoiding the real issues, you're probably not working for an emotionally mature and emotionally powerful leader. Do you feel safe from emotional explosions? Or do you walk around on tenterhooks? Do you walk around on eggshells? Now, it's interesting. Quite frankly, most of us don't fear the emotional explosions, and it's not the explosion that does the damage. Emotional explosions tend to be over quickly, and the damage is minimal. It's the living in constant fear that really punishes the organization. So do you live in fear of an emotional explosion? Are you really optimistic about the organization's future? Think about it. Great leadership, at its core, is an invitation to a tomorrow that is better than today. Is your leader constantly extending that invitation to you? Is your leader, regardless of the circumstances today, regardless of how good they are or how bad they are they constantly talking about, in real live terms, about a tomorrow that is better than today? In Blue Point, we are blessed with an outstanding Chief Operating Officer. Bryn Meredith is our Chief Operating Officer, and he is this person for us. In our organization, he continually paints a future for all of us that is optimistic. He continually carries the torch, not just for today, but for the future. And so this is a really good indicator for you as to whether or not you're working for a boss who is emotionally mature. Next, are you inspired and energized about your work? Do you really believe that your work is important? Do you ever think about this? Every time you've ever worked for a great boss, you felt like the star of the show. It didn't matter if you were the CEO or the receptionist. Somehow, you felt like you were the star of the show. And lastly, do you really feel good about yourself? It took me probably 20 years to recognize this point, that me as a leader, it is not my job to get people to feel good about me. It is my job as a leader to get people to feel good about themselves in my presence. So when you're with this person, your boss, your leader, do you feel better about who you are? If you do, you're likely working for an emotionally powerful leader. So the big question for us, the big question for us all, and especially those who are involved in the leadership development business, why do some leaders atrophy while others thrive? And I believe it is because some simply choose not to take the difficult path of mastering their own mind, becoming the master of their own emotions. So how can you harness the power of your emotions? If you look at this idea of emotions, a lot of the characteristics that we really value in leaders today, leaders who are adaptable, leaders who have self-control, leaders who have empathy, leaders who can make connections with other people. This really flows from this idea of harnessing your emotional power. It's my hope that as we go through the conversation today, I'm able to share with you some specific habits and disciplines that you can employ to significantly lift your power as a leader. But first, I'd like to look at the neuroscience behind this idea of emotional intelligence. Those of you who have been with us since the start of this series will recognize these slides. These are the slides that I used earlier to describe in very overview terms how the brain works. Three pieces of the brain that come into play when we're looking at this idea of emotional intelligence. First, the brainstem, then the amygdala, and then the neocortex. These three pieces of the brain. Now, all our connections with the outside world, all of our feelings, all come in through the brainstem. It comes in the form of minute electrical signals, goes up through the amygdala. Now, remember, the amygdala is the storehouse of all of our emotional patterns. And then it goes to the neocortex, and the neocortex is our smart part of our brain. It is the cognitive thinking, rational language part of our brain. The short version of emotional intelligence is the better that the neocortex and the amygdala can work together, the more intelligent we are. Here is the issue. It takes about 0.2 of a second for an electrical charge to move through the amygdala into the neocortex. You have that amount of time to either be managed by your amygdala, in other words, take an automatic reaction, or choose your own reaction to an emotion. The emotion is not going to go away, but we have a choice in that 0.2 of a second. Now, for leaders, here is the magic and the secret to all of this. The more often we choose our own actions, our own reaction to our emotions in that 0.2 of a second, the more we rewire our brains, we create actual new neural pathways in our brain, and the result of that is a leader that has more emotional maturity, executive presence. Essentially, we increase our emotional intelligence by taking control of our own reactions to our emotions. So my hope today is that I'm able to advance your thinking on the things you can do to accelerate the development of that emotional intelligence. As we go through this series, we're looking at really the 4 dimensions of leadership emotional intelligence. First dimension is personal awareness. It's about being aware of who you are and what is unique about you, and particularly around your brain and your mind. Today we're going to look at the area of self-mastery, how you take control of that, you master your own emotions. In the next 2 sessions, we're going to look firstly at leadership connections, how you can use emotional intelligence, both yours and that of others, to make powerful leadership connections. And then lastly, how you can look at and use your own emotions and those of others to have a broader influence through your organization. Just to give you a quick reminder of what we did in the last webinar, is we looked at this idea of personal awareness through 3 dimensions. Firstly, understanding the uniqueness of your emotions. Every person on this call today has a unique emotional pattern in your amygdala that has been created over an entire lifetime. As well, each person on this call and each one of us has a unique a set of traits and characteristics, our personalities, our belief systems, our needs, fears, wants, the whole system of unique traits is really what makes us uniquely human. Then lastly, the combination of these 2 really have created triggers. There are things that occur, events and experiences, that trigger certain emotional responses and decisions to the experiences around us. So today, look at this idea of self-mastery. So what happens when we let our emotional patterns be the master? We have done a lot of research on, quite frankly, on failed leadership. Several other organizations, excellent organization, Center for Creative Leadership, has also done extensive research into this area. And what we have found is that there are 10 big leadership derailers. Now, whether or not you want to explore the research or not, just look around you and look at the leaders who have failed, or look at leaders who are failing. And I'm sure you'll agree that they possess one or more of these, what we call the 10 big leadership derailers. Are they insensitive? Are they competitive? And by competitive, I mean competitive with everybody, even people inside the organization. Are they explosive? Are they overly critical? Do they have a negative air about them? Are they arrogant? Are they aloof? Are they closed? Now, the reason that I wanted to share this list with you today is not just to have you judge others, but to encourage you to look at that list and see how many of those words actually could be used from time to time to describe you. Is there ever a time when somebody might accuse you of being arrogant, overly critical, overly competitive, dictatorial, selfish, closed, insensitive? My guess is, to some degree, these words describe all of us. The idea of self-mastery is recognizing that these derailers come directly from emotions, and they come from emotions that are not mastered. So how do leaders become the masters of their emotions? How do we accelerate this process of becoming the weird girl rather than the popular jock? How do we accelerate the process of becoming more who we are as people and as leaders? 3 elements. First is learning to control one's impulses and not just simply being a slave to your amygdala. Secondly, it's building the capacity to learn, adapt, and change. And third, it's about creating a resilience, building this powerful capacity to withstand adversity. Great leaders often face great adversity. They face disappointment. They face loss. They face a variety of adversaries in the marketplace. The ability to be resilient and keep on moving, to bob and weave, comes from this idea of self-mastery. Now, I believe that leaders and all of us don't actually control our emotions directly, though we talk about it. What we do is we create stories. We live through stories. We are our stories in many ways. Stories are what the neuroscientists tell us are going on in our minds all the time that describe who we are, what is our purpose, who am I in this organization really, what is my purpose, what is my future. It's all about these stories we continue to create in our minds. We all live through these stories. So if you look at this idea of leadership, great leaders actually master their own stories. They change their stories so they can master their emotions. Can you do that? Can you look and examine, okay, what's my story about who I am? What's my story about who I am in this organization? What's my story about my purpose as a leader? What's my story about my future as a leader? And can I use that story to master my emotions? What I'd like to do today is to share with you 12 leadership habits. These are 12 habits that I believe you can use every day as a leader to significantly enhance your self-mastery. The first one is tune into your feelings, thoughts, and internal dialogues. Let me comment, if I could, for a bit on this idea of an internal dialogue. Think about all the dialogues you have in your brain that go nowhere. Think about the ones that really do you no good at all and, quite frankly, take away from your effectiveness as a leader. Some years ago, I was in Las Vegas doing a speech, and there was a young man who said something in the course of that speech and from the audience that I found particularly rude and disturbing. Now, I continued to go on, and it was a very successful speech, but that young man and his rude comment stuck with me. It stuck in my stomach for some time. For weeks afterwards, I found myself having conversations in my mind, rehearsing conversations about what I could have done, what I should have done to really put him in his place, to really confront him, both in the audience and afterwards, how I could fix him in some way. Now think about it. I'm carrying this story. I'm carrying this internal dialogue, and I'm rehearsing and practicing it. The story kept my anger alive. I kept my anger alive because I allowed that story to continue. I allowed that internal dialogue to continue. Think about it. How many times do you have these phantom dialogues with your boss, with a customer who turned you down, with a coworker, with a competitor, with somebody who hurt you in some way? By recognizing these internal dialogues, by recognizing the damage that they do, by recognizing how much we are allowing them to be the master of our emotions, the master of our time, the master of our brain energy, by recognizing that, we then can remove their impact. What's really interesting is that I'm convinced that I took that story away and I continued that dialogue. That young man had obviously stayed up all night in his first time out in Las Vegas, and his interaction with me probably formed a chapter in his wonderful story about how he was a bit cavalier and out of line at his first conference in Las Vegas, and it probably is a great story. So the internal dialogues we have a powerful impact on our emotional maturity. So think about it. How connected are you really with your feelings and your thoughts? And is that a habit for you? It's important, I think, also to realize is that self-mastery is not about becoming emotionless. It's not about becoming some kind of a cold fish. I'm sad when I see especially young leaders who set out to try to divorce themselves from this idea of emotion. They try to put themselves into this place as a leader that is almost devoid of emotion. And as we talked about before, we're always under the spell of emotions to some degree. Every minute electrical charge coming up into our brain hits the amygdala first. It generates an emotion before it gets to the neocortex, to the thinking part of our brain. We're always in the spell, under the influence of emotions to some degree. And so are the people that we are setting out to lead. The issue is really recognizing is what emotions, and this is really through self-reflection, what emotions help you and which emotions hinder you. Now, there are emotions. All emotions are welcome to some degree, but there are emotions that detract from your leadership effectiveness. Think about it. If you look at the emotions that we all have, but which ones really help and advance your leadership and which ones do not? When you're angry, when you're distressed, when you're annoyed, when you're fearful, when you're anxious, when you're gloomy, when you're irritated, when you're nervous, does this advance your leadership? No. This will generally detract from your from your leadership. The good news is we don't need to act exactly on these emotions, and actually we can develop new approaches to situations so we generate less of these emotions. So what emotions really enhance your leadership effectiveness? So think about it. When you're your very best as a leader, when you're feeling adventuresome, aren't you at your best as a leader? When you're feeling imaginative, cheerful, grateful, inspired, joyful, playful, these are words that tend to describe us at our best. We often will be looking at producing 3, 4, 5, 10 times as much as a leader when we are generating these kind of emotions. The thing for us as leaders is to recognize is we do not have to be at the emotional winds of chance. We can have a huge influence on our own emotions by practicing these 12 disciplines. The second one is this. Get clear on your core values, beliefs, and intentions. Once you do, then you have a framework for making decisions in the moment. For instance, if you truly believe that as part of your leadership role, that one of your core values is to help other people develop. If you believe, and my guess is there's a lot of leadership development professionals on the call here today, my guess is you probably share that value, that at a core level, you actually believe that organizations are best served by people being able to grow, and you see that as a core personal value, and you see it as your intention in interacting with other people is to help them grow in some way. Think about it. When you have clarity around that, when you have absolute clarity around your intention, this gives you the power of putting aside emotions that otherwise might detract you. Say somebody confronts you in some way when you're attempting to provide some feedback. If you're providing that feedback with the intention that you truly are out there to help somebody else, your emotional reaction will be relatively small. If you're not clear on why you're doing that, if you're not clear, you may be embarrassed. You may not give the feedback. You may recoil from the conversation. You may terminate the conversation. So we gain power, emotional power, by gaining that clarity of our intentions. Leadership habit number 3 is to delay gratification. Those of you who are familiar with the late Scott Peck's work in his book, his wonderful book called The Road Less Traveled, he talks about this idea of delayed gratification as really one of the things that allows us to grow as humans. Now, I also believe this is one of the things that allows us to grow as leaders. It's about being much more thoughtful in everything that we do. Think about it. Every time you receive a compliment, every time you hear a new idea, every time you receive a piece of negative criticism, it is the idea of stopping and thinking, hitting the pause button before you react. A really interesting experiment, you may have heard of this, is called the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment. Fascinating experiment coming out of the 60s and 70s by a professor there named Walter Mischel. Now, what Walter did was he designed an experiment with young children, and each child was offered one marshmallow now. Or if they waited, and they had to wait about 15 minutes, they would get 2 marshmallows. So what would happen is he would leave them in a room by themselves with 1 marshmallow in front of them. And he would tell them if they could have this marshmallow now, and they're quite welcome to have it, or alternately, if they waited a few minutes, 15 minutes as it worked out, they would get 2 marshmallows. What his research found is that the children who waited, delayed gratification, children who waited had significantly better life outcomes than those who did not, by a landslide. Their SAT scores were higher. Their educational attainment was higher. Even their physical condition was greater. And they had significantly greater career success. I believe the message here is that those of us who lead, if we can develop the discipline of a split-second wait before we react, that this is the road to much, much better decisions and much better leadership. This process of delayed gratification of can you really wait is something that can really be extended through your entire life in the course of a day. Think about it this way. Every time you're offered a cold glass of beer on a hot day, that rather than drinking that beer immediately, that beer waits until you choose to drink it. Every time a meal is served and you're extraordinarily hungry, that meal waits until you're ready to eat it. Every time somebody asks you a question at work, rather than an instant response, you wait until you're ready to answer that question. Now, this is not a call for a lack of spontaneity. And yes, you can eat your dessert first. And yes, we can live in a flexible, spontaneous way in much of our lives. But we as leaders are also called upon to take a measured approach to situations. People count on us to be thoughtful and to pause and reflect. And this is the great discipline of leaders who have mastered their emotions. The fourth one, practice feeling but not being. And this is something you can do every day. Practice feeling but not being. The classic example here is to practice feeling angry, feeling anger, but not being angry. And think about it. Something makes you angry, good information. Something gives you this emotion of anger. But being angry is acting out of that anger. This is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity that we all have every day. If you're a leader in the fray of business, in the complexity and chaos of an organization, if you're trying to lead teams while the market is extraordinarily competitive, while people are disappointing you, and you work in this whole milieu of people and issues and systems and competitors and such, every day there will be an opportunity for you to experience the emotion of anger. Every day. Practice experiencing that emotion, learning from it, but not being angry. When you choose the discipline of not being, you are choosing to master your emotions. Now, these emotions also can be very useful. Think about how you can direct your emotions into personal change. And as a leadership coach, I often find myself working with my clients in looking for options as to how they can use emotions to fuel their personal change. Think about this. Here's a couple of examples. Say you're experiencing fear. There's lots of things to be fearful of. It's important then to separate out, is this fear good information because it's a safety issue? I'm afraid of something that could put me or my organization or something in danger. That's helpful. That's helpful information. And I should feel that fear. Or is it fear because it's a new challenge or an opportunity? So if it's a new challenge or an opportunity, I'm feeling fear, that likely means it's a very fertile area for me. So then I would encourage my client to move towards the fear, to dive towards the fear, because the fear is probably a big billboard saying huge opportunity here. If there's some fear associated with it, and it's not a safety issue, often there's tremendous leadership opportunity. Guilt, another emotion. When we feel guilt, it's important to decide on whether or not it's our guilt really or it's somebody else's. But if it is our guilt, the message is, in what way am I not living up to my own standards? There's only one question. If I'm feeling guilty, do I want to continue to feel guilty? In what way am I not living up? It's not the organization standards. It's not other people's standards. But if I'm feeling guilty, it likely is because I'm letting myself down. I'm selling out on myself in some way. What personal change do I need to make like right now so that I will not feel guilty in the future? Anger. If I'm feeling angry at something, what's very helpful for me as a leader is to ask myself this question: what's my part in it? Now, our first answer to that question is often none. If somebody's making me angry, it's normally their fault. When we're really honest with ourselves, often there's some percentage of that is ours. This is extraordinarily helpful information for us as leaders, because by making the change in our small part, 5%, 10%, 20% of the issue, by making that change, this is how we model the kind of behavioral change we expect of others as leaders. The message here in leadership habit number 5 is our emotions can be directed to make significant personal change. Leadership habit number 6, build capacity for forgiveness, tolerance, and acceptance. Build capacity for forgiveness, tolerance, and acceptance. As we do this, essentially, what we're doing is not judging people in the moment. We have this sense that other people are trying their best. They may need some feedback. They may need coaching. They may need correction in some way. But it is this idea that at the very core, the people that we are leading are fully capable of doing great work. And most times when they do not, it is through lack of information, it is through honest mistakes, or it is through poor leadership on our part. When we make that assumption, it may be something else, but when we make that assumption, that provides this territory, this fertile ground for forgiveness, tolerance, and acceptance. When you think about this idea of forgiveness, I am convinced that it is one of the most powerful leadership practices. It also is one of the most underused leadership practices. Think about it. If somebody came to you and said, I've messed up our relationship, please forgive me, would any of us not be struck by that? And what if we went to somebody who had really messed up in some way, and we said, we forgive you, I forgive you, let's move on past this? It has incredible power, and it is an indication of an emotionally mature leader as well. I'm going to ask you to do a brief exercise here with me as you're watching the screen. Get a piece of paper somewhere, and I'd like you to write down a name. You can keep this private. You don't have to show anybody else this, but I'd like you to write this name down. Likely every one of us have somebody that we have been withholding forgiveness from. They have hurt us in some way. They've disappointed us in some way, and we have been holding this, and that we've been paying a price for this, an emotional price for this, and it has control over us. We have not mastered our emotions if we're holding that over them. Who is this person that we would gain mastery of our emotions if we forgave this person? Take this moment, just write that person's name down. This is just for yourself. Write that person's name down. Now, the second part of the exercise is probably more difficult. I know it is more difficult for me. Who do you need to ask forgiveness from? Who have you let down at some point? Who have you disappointed at some point? And you need to let go of that as well. And until you at least ask them for forgiveness, you are not the master of your own emotions. You're carrying that story around as well. You're carrying that guilt around as well. Who do you need to ask forgiveness from? Write that name down as well. Now, think about it. If we continue to keep our accounts very short, we continued to forgive people who let us down, who disappoint us in some way, and we continue, when we messed up, immediately asked for forgiveness from that person. Think about then how we become the master of our own minds. We don't carry those stories around anymore. We don't carry that judgment, and we don't carry that guilt. We learn from it, but we don't carry it anymore. We become the master of our own ships. The seventh leadership habit is this idea of stop labeling others. And again, we all do this to some degree. We all do this. We look at people and we say, that person has an attitude problem. That person is a bit of a know-it-all. That person is overly ambitious. These labels we put on people really do us a great disservice. It does them a great disservice as well, and we all do it to some degree. Some of you may remember from a previous webinar when I talked about the idea of attribution error. It's called fundamental attribution error. And what fundamental attribution error is we ascribe qualities to other people and we put those in concrete. And we say that person is a jerk, or that person is really brainy, or that person is an organization ladder climber, or that person there is always rude and is self-absorbed. These labels, the problem with the labels is people are not those labels. And when we put the label on them, what we do is we allow that label to be the master, and it will show through in all of our leadership activities. Every time we deal with that person, if we see that person as being selfish, individualistic, every time we deal with that person, every emotion that is generated in interactions with that person will be seen through that lens. So the more we can get rid of the label, the more we can see people as whole, complex, somewhat chaotic, emotional beings themselves that are growing in some way and are trying to do the best they can with what they got, the more power we get. Because then we can deal with them in the moment with the way they are in the moment, not on the basis of some label that we have put on them a week ago, a month ago, or 10 years ago. Leadership habit number 8, practice silence, contemplation, and reflection. Think about how much time you actually spend with yourself. How much time do you as a leader have in conversation with yourself, thinking about who you are? What are your leadership priorities? What are you working on these days? What are you doing that really makes an impact as a leader? What is your mission as a leader? Now, I'm not going to encourage you to become some kind of a saffron-robed monk and to spend hours and hours every day in deep meditation. However, that if you look at the frenetic lives that most of us experience as leaders, in the world today with change and technology and interaction and speed of movement, we really live in a time when leaders are continually bombarded with communication, interactions, electronic stimulation, and the like. Great leaders take time to get to know themselves. Most great leaders take time every day in silence and contemplation. How much time do you really spend in silence? The question here is, are you your own best friend? Are you your own best coach? Are you your own best advisor? I have some clients who have looked at making a major shift in their leadership. They wanted to increase their impact significantly in the organization. I really encourage them to stop and, before they do that, build a strong platform of contemplation with themselves, to think about what they really need to do, what is the most important things to them, what do they need to hold on to at all costs as they move forward, what do they really need to let go of to move on to that new chapter as a leader, what are they really prepared to do to advance to that next level as a leader. This is extraordinarily difficult to do unless you take some quiet time with yourself. And it can be with nobody else. No coach, no mentor, no advisor can give you that clear pathway forward that only you can develop if you have that conversation with yourself. Leadership habit number 9, kill your hot buttons. We all have them. These are those triggers. These are those events or words or phrases or situations that really just set us off. Every time we as leaders have an inappropriate response to a situation or act in a way that is out of proportion to the circumstances, a hot button has been hit in some way. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a hot button. It is the idea that these hot buttons need to be controlled. Most of them, quite frankly, need to be muted. Now, the hot button may not go away, but the great masters, great leader masters, kill these hot buttons at work especially. Here is the most disturbing part about these hot buttons, is everybody else knows what they are. I love this Barry Kaufman quote. Think about it. Every time we allow someone to move us with anger, we teach them to be angry. Every time we allow someone to move us with anger, we teach them to be angry. I had the opportunity of flying into Orlando a couple of years back, and I happened to be flying in at a spring break. And so the airplane I was on was full of families. And what I noticed was this, that on the airplane, almost every time a young child would start to act up, one of the parents would reach into a treat bag and give them a Twinkie, some kind of a treat. And so I watched this happening over the course of about an hour. And then I realized one thing, is that these children had perfectly trained their parents to give them Twinkies. I would watch the children. They would start to act up on purpose so that the parent would give them the Twinkie. So when you think about this, the more the parents were giving them Twinkies, the more the children would be acting up on the grand scheme of things. Every time we allow someone to move us with anger, we teach them to be angry. Those of you who are parents will know this. When we have these hot buttons with our children, and our children know what they are. If our children want to get our attention, they know exactly how to get our attention. So when you think about it from this term of mastery in your organization, how much power are you giving away by allowing other people to know what your hot buttons are? I have 4 questions for you. On the screen here, please answer these questions again on a piece of paper somewhere where you are. It makes me angry when. What really makes you angry? I hate it when. I am offended when someone blank. I get embarrassed when. As you do that, you probably have identified 4 hot buttons. It is often by simply identifying these, talking about these, becoming literate on your hot buttons, that they go away or they at least become controllable. Leadership habit number 10, confront emotional terrorism. Confront emotional terrorism. If you, as a leader, allow it to occur, it reflects directly on your leadership. And we see this happen in many organizations. And think about it. And we often excuse ourselves because of the other technical performance of the person. If you have somebody working for you who is an emotional terrorist in your organization, this is not a judgment or criticism of them. They're just doing the best they can with what they got, and whatever their issues are their issues. The however is this. You cannot allow that to continue and continue to see yourself as a great leader. You cannot allow it to continue. The classic excuse is this. Well, maybe they're not really good with people, but they get their work done, and we need them, and their technical knowledge is superb, and they've been here since the beginning of time, and they perform well in so many other areas. It's just this one area that they don't perform well in. I can tell you this, it's very unlikely that you know all the damage that this person is causing in your organization. You probably also don't know how much this is reflecting on you and your own leadership. If you allow emotional terrorism to occur in your organization, this reflects directly on who you are as a leader. And people are judging you not just by what you are doing, they're judging you by what you're allowing to occur within your organization. Leadership habit number 11, release your personal emotional hostages. If we're really honest with ourselves, we all have emotional hostages. You know that people are a little afraid of you. You know that somebody really, fears being rejected by you, fears your criticism in some way. Many of us, either consciously or somewhat unconsciously, keep this emotional, others emotional prisoners because it is how we exert power over other people. In other words, people are a little afraid of me blowing up. People might be a little afraid of me rejecting them. People might be a little afraid of me criticizing them. These are emotional hostages in my organization. Think about it. Who in your organization is your emotional hostage? When you think about this, what do you need to do to release them? What do you need to do to let them know they have nothing to fear from you? They do not have to. They don't need to fear your rejection. They don't need to fear your criticism. They don't need to fear your displeasure in some way. Now, we all know how we can do that. We all know the kind of conversation that we need to have to do that. The reason that we don't have that conversation is because we're afraid to lose the power. It is just the opposite. We gain leadership power by releasing our emotional hostages. The last leadership habit is this: create a strict mental diet. Create a strict mental diet. This really is about creating an emotional fortress. The world's a tough place. There's lots of change out there. There's lots of adversity. Without this real strong emotional fortress that is created through what I call a strict mental diet, the biggest winds will blow us over. By a strict mental diet, I mean this. We have choices. We have choices, and no generation has had the choices that we've had in terms of our entertainment, in terms of our conversations, in terms of our dialogue, in terms of the communities that we join or don't join. We have choices that are remarkable in terms of everything from where we spend our leisure time to how we interact with our families to what we read at night. Whether or not we watch that reality TV show or read a piece of philosophy. Whether or not we have wandering conversations at the bar or join a book discussion group. We all know what it takes to have a mental diet of what we put into our brain that's going to help us grow this emotional fortress. Now, those 12 leadership habits, I think, are critical for us as leaders to grow in this area of self-mastery. Here are the 3 things that are part of the rhythm of extraordinary leaders. And actually, if you look around your organization and you see leaders who you think are exceptional, my guess is they practice these 3 things in a rhythm all day long. And here are the 3 things. Number 1, pause and reflect. They simply hit that pause button, and you watch them. In the meeting, they'll pause before they speak. Everything from when they eat a meal, through to an interaction, through to asking a question, through to receiving a piece of feedback, they'll pause and reflect. What they're doing is they're asking themselves this question: what is really happening here? Number 2, they're always considering their options. One of the greatest gifts of being human is the gift of free will. We can select our best next step. So think about it. What if through the course of the day that you always had this tape running in the background? What are my options? What are my options? What's the best next step I can take? Those of you who are coaches will know this. A coach, all you have is the next moment ahead of you with your client. All you have is the next moment ahead of you. Great coaches are always asking this question. In this moment, what's my best option? What's the best thing I can do to help my client? Is it a question? Is it an insight? Is it a piece of feedback? Is it a challenge, a confrontation? Or is it nothing at all? This rhythm of always thinking, in this conversation, what's the next best thing I can say, is the hallmark of the great leader. And then thirdly, it's about making a commitment that you are going to be the master of your ship. You're not going to be blown by the winds of emotions. You're going to accept them. You're going to learn from them. But you're always going to choose your own action or reaction. You're not going to simply work at the behest of others. You're not going to be swayed continually by seeking approval of others. You're not going to be always trying to avoid things that are emotionally explosive. That you are going to choose your own action or reaction in every circumstance. So here's the assessment piece. You today as a leader, what words would describe you? Leadership today requires very, very special qualities and circumstances. Would these words describe you? Do people see you as positive or negative? Do they see you as energizing? Is the room better when you come into the room or better when you leave? Are you flexible and resilient? Do you have a gentle spirit? Are you alert and responsive? Are you sensitive to others? This is the list that describes, I believe, the leader of the next generation. One last point I'd like to leave you with. We like to blame others. We like to blame our customers. We like to blame our boss. We like to blame a situation. We like to blame the organization. We like to blame overwork. We like to blame and like to blame and like to blame. We all do to some degree. If you want to be the master of your own ship as a leader, the number one thing you need to understand and accept, and we all do, that we and no one else are responsible for our emotions. We and no one else are responsible for our emotions. It is the one true foundation of the great leader. I want to thank you for your time today. It's been a delight to share these insights with you. On the screen now, you'll see my email address and telephone number. I am thrilled to take your calls. I'd be delighted to hear from you. Please feel free to either email me or call me at any time. Happy to talk about emotional intelligence and any aspect of leadership.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We do want to remind you that this webinar series is drawn from Blue Point's workshop, The Leader Within. It's an in-house, highly experiential development experience which is designed to help leaders at all levels to significantly increase their emotional intelligence and really become powerful, positive forces within their teams and organizations. If you'd like more information about The Leader Within or any of Blue Point's workshops, I would be happy to connect with you. So please feel free to reach out to me via email at juliehenry@bluepointleadership.com. Many of you were with us for the first 2 webinars in this series, but in case you have missed them, you can access a recording of the webinars on our website at bluepointleadership.com. Also, please be sure to join us on May 1st when Greg presents Real Leadership Connections, Becoming Important to People, and on June 12th, Influencing Others, Shining a Light that Energizes and Inspires. We encourage you to visit our website and register for these webinars today.